Hello everyone and welcome to this video where I'm going to be going through my steps on troubleshooting and fixing a microcontroller that's giving you a hard time. Now, this is supposed to be watched in parallel with my microcontroller video, but this is going into the advanced diagnostics and techniques that I utilize to fix things when I see that they're not working or giving me otherwise a hard time. These steps quite literally come from my experience yesterday as I was trying to fix, update, and diagnose the issues I was having with my Anchor microcontroller. So one thing you'll see on the newest versions of my sailboats is that I actually added a tether, and I've simplified the Anchor. It's now a one-button solution. The Anchor goes down, and then you press it, and the Anchor goes back up. And not only that, if you have an Anchor deployed and you start to apply a throttle, the Anchor will automatically release so you don't end up destroying your creation and kind of getting pulled all over the place. Anyway, what sounds like more or less a simple instrument panel microcontroller, obviously you have to have intermediate skills, I would say, in microcontrollers, ended up being an exercise in me pretty much coming close to rage quitting based on just not being able to solve the issues here. Just to show you a practical example and the difference between my old version, well, the old one, first of all, required the boat to be on, otherwise it was using the electrical power from the sensor on the bottom. So that was the real reason I decided to change up this system. But I also didn't like that it required a separate indicator from this system, so I thought a one-button solution would be much better. And I thought, alright, that's going to be pretty simple. We're just going to throw it together and end up with something that we can use. From the winch itself, you can follow this down to the microcontroller, and you'll see that the code itself that I designed here isn't too big, relatively small actually, but it works on the premise of pressing either this button or this button, and it activates a sequence here. So I thought, alright, I'm just going to go ahead and add a couple parts here. My plan was to get back to my helicopter build that I've been really excited to do, so I thought the microcontroller would be a small little update, and I'm going to end up spending the rest of the evening working on this. Well, I spent 2 hours and the whole evening working on the Anchor microcontroller. Which brings me to my first piece of advice. I highly recommend you do at least this, is save multiple iterations of your creation as you're updating your microcontroller and possibly moving nodes around and, trying to troubleshoot the problem, whatever it may be. Make sure you save multiple versions. Now here's just a little example of the same boat that I've been working on, saved 8 times, and then you'll also have other ones like this, where I also just save it so many times as I'm going through it. And what that allows me to do is, if I find myself in a position where I've done something that should not have been done and it actually ends up working worse than how it was previously working, at least you'll always have a fallback. And yes, I'm aware you have the backups, but for me, I like to save milestones. If you get it working a little bit, you save it. If you do something else, you save it again. Whereas this kind of just uses an arbitrary couple minutes or spawns or whatever, and it only really goes back an hour, not even half an hour, let's say. So if you're doing this, yeah, you can use this as an ultimate fallback, but saving iterations will help you if you're just trying to not lose your entire progress and get very upset and rage quit. Now, the first piece of actual digging into the issue, and this is something that I've actually experienced myself, has led to a lot of issues, and I was able to troubleshoot it in the end, but it's quite literally find the path of each of your input and output nodes, all of these, follow them to make sure they are in the right location. Sounds silly, but if you're in your microcontroller and you accidentally move some of these around, or you add new nodes, or change the shape or size or whatever, your nodes may not be attached to whatever they need to be. So as a very first thing to do is just follow each one of these to make sure it is in fact attached to the right ones, because what if the winch length was actually attached to the distance sensor? That would be causing an issue. That's not even digging into the coding of the microcontroller, but just physically looking at what it is plugged into and seeing that it does work right. Especially for instrument panels, just to make sure that your actual instrument panel is using the right channel. There's been a couple times where I changed the controller around, changed the channel inside the controller, didn't change it out here. Also, on the physical side of things here, is just to make sure everything's plugged in properly. So if you have a distance sensor that needs to be plugged into electricity, make sure it is in fact plugged in, because if it isn't, you may be getting adverse results in your microcontroller, and that's not even a fault of the coding, it's just a fault of not being connected. Now this is the big one. It's to go into your microcontroller itself and try to diagnose where the problem may be coming from. Now, easier said than done, and I'm going to give you some tips and tricks, but primarily it's to start following the paths inside the logic and to try to see where things are going wrong. So in the case of my microcontroller for my anchor, I would do multiple tests, and I would jump into the boat, see that it worked partway, and then it wouldn't work the rest of the way. Now, as you can see, the code is more complex what I ended up with than the one I showed you in the beginning of the video, and that's because I added a few things. I added parts that would disable the anchor, so things like adding the throttle to the vessel. I added if the depth was too much for the anchor to reach, but not only that, because I previously did have that option, I made it so that the sensor, the distance sensor on the bottom of the boat wasn't always on, so nothing here that was added was crazy, but just the combination of the programming and the various SR latches and the various pulses, something was not working right. So as you can see with this version, when you press this, well, nothing happens. And the first thing that I thought, and the first thing that I've done, is added all of these tooltips. Now you can see here, it actually tells me when you hover over the microcontroller, the state of a lot of different things. So when you've pressed this, see I'm holding the button now, and it tells me, well, all of these things are on. When I let go, they stay on. Interesting. If I press it again, they turn off. So there's obviously in this case an issue of something being turned on, like an SR latch or a pulse that keeps things on. So that should be the starting point, in my opinion, of trying to uncover what exactly is going on. Now, you're not limited, I think, by tooltips, so fill them out and see what is going on with the code. You could see I've put one here, and I said this was the reset. SR, I have some up here for the main SR latch. I have even over here downstream when it is supposed to lower the winch, so SR for the down winch. This is the SR for the magall, and then down here I have it for going up. So I just put a bunch of these things to try to see what is going on with this code. Yes, you could also do that with dials and add a bunch of external nodes, temporary of course, just like this, for the various things, whether it's an output or a number output or number, but it just adds an extra step. You have to increase the size of the microcontroller, and it's just easier to hover over the thing and see what is going on here. Also, sometimes it's good to eliminate variables. So things like the seabed depth meter, rather than letting it kind of do the thinking for me and being attached, I would probably try to put a temporary constant number, let's say 30 meters, and just see if that happens, because the 30 meters would be within the 40 meter range of the medium winch. So you want to, if you want to test out how the boat will behave when the seabed is at 30, you put 30. If you want to see what if it's too deep, what if the winch shouldn't even deploy, and set it to something like 100, and in this case I should have this red light turn on, so at least now, okay, I see the light itself is on, these things are still like this, so I'm holding it now. If I release it, So you can kind of diagnose and see what it is doing. See the SR latch, it was on, it's shut down, this was on, so it's partially working. We can't say it's not working at all, but with that partially working, we got to see what is going on. So I would go ahead and say that the seabed depth meter is not the problem in this case. You remove it and you can isolate yourself on other variables and parts of the code. Another thing I like to do is, rather than starting at the beginning of the code and kind of as you press the button what will happen, start at the back end of the code. And I go here, for example, to my winch speed, and here to having the number applied, and that's this SR latch. So we got to see why this SR latch for lowering the winch isn't turning on, rather than digging into all of the stuff ahead. So in this case, you can track it. And first thing what I do, to be honest, is eliminate variables, eliminate things. So in this case, maybe something is constantly resetting it as I press the button. So I press it here, it sets, but it also resets right away. So what I would do, just to see that my code here is good, is I would disconnect this node and then probably just disconnect the node that adds the negative. So that would be to make it go back up. So in this case, I've shut that down, I've shut this down. Will it just go down and not come back up? Doesn't matter. We just want to see if the part of the code is right. So in this case, it doesn't even go down. And if I hold that, you could see that it says SR up is on. Okay, so it's actually telling me the up and the down is on, but because of that, it still isn't even making its way down. So what that tells me is it didn't even get to this part of the code to turn this on. It's shutting it down right away, even beforehand. So the problem with the code in my case was something in the front end rather than the back end. And what I did find out eventually is that it was coming in this sequence here, specifically where I had a couple of things disabling it in my case. Now you got to see for yourself and determine what works for you, but that's where saving iterations will save your life. It will, not literally, but quite figuratively, will save you from the headache and the stress of having to, like, for example, I removed a couple of these things here. What if I now don't remember? Like, yeah, sure, I can connect that back. And then here, I'm pretty sure I attached this SR to this OR, but what if it wasn't? So you do want to keep the saves. So with knowing that the code problem is somewhere here, what I would then recommend doing is making sure that we at least get it going in partially, making sure that partial part of the code works. For example, if I could lower the winch down or the anchor, that will at least tell me that part of the process is working. So for example, I can turn off the reset latch here, just turn it off for a second, and even that doesn't work. And in fact, it toggles on all this stuff. So it toggles on the mag, it toggles the up and the down and the main SR, which is good, but it doesn't work. So long story short is try to find where the problem with the code is by isolating areas. So as I tried, I disconnected this pulse, so that was good, except obviously something here was still triggering the up and the down at the same time, which I definitely don't want. I don't want up and down to be on. And you could see here, this pulse is pushing this on. So even though I did disconnect the release of this latch to do a true test, it could be an issue with this pulse. So maybe, I'm just holding control, disconnect everything from that pulse to see if this is our problem, and going like that. Maybe it's not. If that's the case, load up the old version and keep trying one at a time. Now, yes, it gets frustrating, yes, it gets tiresome, and yes, you will get exhausted. For the microcontroller itself, I'd say things to look out for are make sure you're using the right logic gates, that you're not using ORs and ANDs interchangeably, and specifically my biggest problem is with the SR latches or flip-flops and with the pulses, or especially push to toggles, because they're a little tougher to control when they're on. That's why I usually find that putting a tip tool or tool tip on an SR latch to see whether or not it's engaged or disengaged is very useful in your creation. Now, as I said, it can get exhausting. So if that's the case, I really do strongly recommend you just step away and reevaluate. If you're getting stressed out, if you're getting worked up, if your brain is fogged and you're not able to do what you were set out to do properly, then I think you're better off taking a break, and maybe the problem will solve itself in your head. And if not, at least you'll have a clean, fresh set of eyes when you go back to it. So, yes, it's not technical, but if you do find yourself just stuck and unable to proceed, at least step back, reevaluate, take a small break, and maybe you'll uncover something. Of course, if that doesn't work, you can always ask the community, right? We do have a series of Discord servers that allows people to come up with their problems and kind of discuss and problem solve, troubleshoot, all that good stuff. My own Discord server included. I have something like that allows people to get together and solve any of their problems. So that is for sure an option as well. Of course, you can't really expect everyone's going to come running and jumping to solve your problem, but I found generally the community does tend to be very knowledgeable. And if not, you can also see on Google if people had already asked questions such as this, and if there's already kind of answers, if there's people that are experiencing a similar problem, or maybe they want to share their own experiences with it. So I think that is, we do have a lot of useful tools at our disposal, and I'd highly recommend to do that. And honestly, as a very, very end fallback, I'd recommend, if nothing else works and you just cannot get it going, then at that point I think you may just need to sit down and rewrite portion or all of the code, because at least if you rewrite it from scratch, you should be able to get to a point where the code itself is no longer an issue and you're not recycling old parts. So yeah, no one wants to hear redoing work, but there are instances where just it is unsalvageable, and really it's not even worth spending more hours debugging it than just less hours rewriting it. So those are my pieces of advice. I do think that there are many more parts that people can follow in other advice, but as far as how I solved my anchor problem here, that is exactly what I used. I just ended up writing the code and I was able to get it going. So you see here, we're actually able to deploy our anchor. It's going down, and as it connects, our boat kind of gets dragged down, and see the thing even ripped off because we have too much momentum. So that's fair. That happens too. In this case, we'd have to set our sails, push our sails in so they're no longer picking up wind. But regardless, what you do have is something that works. So I ended up with a working microcontroller that actually did accomplish what I needed it to do. So hopefully this video and this advice is useful to you. Just like engineering, just like a lot of real life problems, you can follow a series of steps to hopefully help you and mitigate disasters and troublesome kind of problems, I guess. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I do hope that this video was informative. I do want to give a shout out and thank you to all of my YouTube members and my Discord server boosters. Of course, they give extra support to kind of make sure that I'm feeling the love as I put together all of these videos and all this content. I do love the comments. I read all of them. I do love the engagement with the community, and I do thank each and every one of you for watching these videos and for supporting. So thank you. Hopefully this helped, and until next time, happy Stormworksing.